So I had someone ask me the other day about being a new dungeon master or wanting to learn to be a dungeon master. They had played D&D in the past, or somewhat familiar with how the game works, and their game master, dungeon master had left, and they were just now finding new people, moved to an area, found people to play with, and they were curious like, "Hey, I kind of want to learn how to do this, but I don't really know where to start. Can you give me some advice?" So I talked with them for a little while, and I thought about it, I was like, I'm going to make a quick video about advice I would give people who just want to start playing as the DM of a game and rather than as a player, a typical player. So the first thing I want to say about it is you are going to way overthink it when you first start. There's no way around it. You're going to think you need to plan every character, every NPC, every interaction, every possible thing that a player may want to do. It's going to run through your head and you go, I need to figure this out ahead of time. When the truth is, you really don't. A lot of what you're going to do at the table is going to be on the fly and ad lib. You can plan all you want to, and I've been running games for close to 10 years now. I only use maybe a quarter of the stuff I plan unless I know exactly where my players are going. Like, we've agreed ahead of time, we're going to this dungeon, we want to find out what's in it. I planned a dungeon, I'm going to use most of that. But if they're not in a confined area where they can just go and do what they want to, I'm only going to use maybe a quarter of what I plan. So the first thing is take a breath. You don't need to plan everything. Be prepared to improvise. If you make rough notes and they just give you ideas of what can happen, what players do, that is going to be a lot better starting point. It's a little bit less stressful for you. Even though you're going to feel unprepared, you're going to learn quickly that you have enough prepared to do it. One of the other questions that he asked me was, how do I memorize and learn all of these rules? There's so many different rules. Now, that's going to change a little bit depending on which game you play. If you play 5e, you have a little bit less to learn. If you play Pathfinder or Pathfinder 2, you have more to learn. The problem with that view is that you think you have to memorize all of these rules. Are there some cool core rules that everyone needs to know? Sure. You need to know, do I need to roll a high number or a low number? Which dice do I roll in this situation? Very basic things. But I think the question was more like, well, what do I do in this specific scenario or that specific scenario? A lot of the times you can come up with an answer without knowing what the rules actually say. Are there rules for it in a lot of these game systems? Yes. Do you have to memorize them all? You absolutely don't. If you come up with a way that makes sense to you and your players, and you just run with it for the rest of that session, there's not really a problem. You have the option of saying, hey, I don't know, we're going to run it this way, we'll figure it out afterwards. Everybody kind of nods their head and you move on. That is the quickest way to do it, instead of going, I don't know, let me stop, let me look, and it takes 10 minutes to find what you're looking for. Now, for 5e and Pathfinder, it's a little bit easier. Those rules are online and you can search them really quickly, but it pauses the game. It's easier just to make a decision and move on if you don't know. So don't overthink memorizing rules. One of the other things I talked to him about was dice can really mess the game up. When I first started running games, I didn't understand that you don't use dice for everything. You hear people playing games, you see handfuls of dice, they throw all the dice, you go, oh, something happened. And it gives you this impression that everything is dice controlled. That's not how the game is supposed to work. One, you should only roll dice if there is a consequence to their action. So if a player, let's say the player's playing a rogue and they want to pick a lock, you have a couple of ways you can approach it. If the door is locked, they can roll to see if they pick it, but why? If there is no one that's trying to prevent them, if they're not having to sneak around, if there is no drawback and they have all the time in the world, you shouldn't make them roll to pick the lock. They're just going to pick the lock. Give enough time, they'll get through. Now, if there's a catch to it, it's a magical lock, they might not be able to do it. Or there is a trap built into the lock. Okay, now you have a reason, a consequence of failure. If there are guards on patrol and they have to do it in a time crunch, there is a consequence to failure. Rolling is appropriate. But without a consequence or an immediate time threat, if the thing they're trying to do is something that they will eventually achieve reasonably, then they should get to do it without rolling dice. It just speeds the game up. The example that I gave was, let's say the party runs into a room and they're looking for a hidden vault. You know it's in the room somewhere. Now, they say, okay, I want to look behind the bookcase. I want to look under the chair. And I told him, I was like, so you, as the game master, know the vault is under the rug that's under the table. So the table's sitting on a rug, and underneath that rug is the vault. If a player says, I want to move the table, flip the rug, and look under the rug, you can address it two ways. The first way, and the way I suggest you do it, is go, you find the vault. Or you can say, roll a dice. Here's the problem. They moved the table, they moved the rug, they're staring right at this thing, and you still ask them to make a perception check or a spot hidden check. Why? They can see it. You don't use dice for things that are very obvious. Now, that seems intuitive once it's said, but it's easy, and I've seen other DMs do it. They start rolling dice for things that are very obvious you don't need it to, when you don't need to. There is another way to look at it. If the players, let's say they're tired, or let's say they just are lacking creativity at the moment, they don't really know everything that's in the room, and the game's kind of slowing down. They say, I don't know, I just want to search the room. They don't give you specifics. They're just like, I want to search the room. Okay, fine. Let them make a search check with whichever stat or skill your game uses. What they're doing is they are allowing the dice to take over and play the game in place of them. They had the option to look and touch and interact with the room. They're saying, I forego all that, I just want the dice to decide. In that case, you can surely just let the dice decide if they find it. If they roll well enough, they happen to look under the rug, under the table. But that really should be a player decision. If they don't want to be specific, use dice. If they are specific and they are right, there's no point. Now, you can go too far. You can go too far. You can say, all right, that bookshelf has a secret switch in it. And if the player goes, well, I touched book 1, I touched book 2, I touched book 3, eventually they're going to get, don't make them touch every book on the bookshelf. If they say, I'm going to search the books for a secret trap or a secret door, there's no point in rolling. There's no point in saying, making them say every book. You know they're going to get it eventually. Just say yes and move on. It makes the game a lot better. Another thing that I would say if you're a beginner dungeon master, do not be afraid of giving out too much information. You can't give out too much information. When I started, I was like, well, if I tell them too much, they'll know the secrets and they'll know all the things I've planned. That's okay. They're supposed to learn those things. If they learn a little bit early, oh well, that's fine. You can keep on going. If they never learn at all, they can't make decisions. Give more information than you think you need. Here's an example of when this is a really smart idea. Traps. When I first was introduced to traps, I was playing Lost Mines of Phandelver. It was the intro box for 5th edition. At the very beginning of that, there's a goblin ambush, and the next thing you do is you're walking up a path to where the goblins came from. There's 2 traps on that path. The first one is they get hit by it because they're not expecting it. And the second one, they're expecting it, so they're looking for it. It's there to teach the players that traps exist. The problem that I had is if I start narrating what the place looks like, you're walking down a path and all of a sudden you see a brush of or a pile of leaves. In my head as beginner dungeon master, that means they're going to have some alert to know that they need to check here. I want them to get hit by the trap, so I shouldn't give them a tell they're going to get hit by the trap. What happens when they do that is after they get hit by the trap, then they spend the next 5 minutes every time they move, I want to touch this, I want to touch that, I want to touch this, and they slow the game down, checking for traps, checking for traps, checking for traps. After talking with my players, getting hit by a trap is not fun. Looking for traps you can't see is not fun. The purpose of a trap is not a gotcha for the players. Every now and then, having a good hidden one to just keep them on their toes is fine, but by and large, traps should be somewhat noticeable by the players. Most traps should have a tell. There should be something there that gets the players looking. For example, hallway, pressure plate on the floor. Kind of hard to see that one, kind of hard to give a tell away, but what you can do is, let's say there's darts shot out the walls. You can describe the holes in the walls. Is that going to trigger something to make them start to look? Absolutely, it should. You can describe that there's a giant log in the ceiling that may or may not swing down from some trigger. They know there's something there. The fun for the players is how do we circumvent it? It's not how do we find it. It's like how do we defeat the thing that we know is there. Treat traps as a thing that you show your players, loosely show your players, and then let them figure out how to circumvent it. Finding it, nobody wants to play hide and seek with traps. People want to play how do I beat the trap. Let them know it's there, try to beat it. I'll give you another example. I was running, it was a different module. I can't remember what the adventure was. There is a mirror. If you walk in front of the mirror, it freezes you in place permanently. There's a couple ways out of it, but this isn't, it lasts for 10 minutes, it lasts for an hour permanently, unless the players can find one of the few ways to undo it. There was no tell for that trap as it was written in the module. It was like the weakest part of the module, the only thing I could find wrong with it. So rather than having them just blindly walk in front of this mirror and just get smacked with it, I had this large giant rat that was just like this, frozen, not moving. They thought it was kind of weird, but they ignored it. And rather than poking at it to see if it'll move, they said, that's strange, and they kept on walking, and the first one that walked through got smacked by the trap. There was a tell, they ignored the tell, the trap got them. So use tells for traps. Don't try to hide everything. Let's see, is there anything else I would tell people that's just starting? Plan less, improvise more. I kind of alluded to that earlier. Plan less, improvise more. Also, rely on your players to do some of the work. You should not be forced to memorize all of the rules. Expect your players to learn something. If I would recommend anything, they need to understand their own character. They don't have to know how to play their friends. They don't know how to run the game. But expect your players to at least know how to play their own character. Now, if they've never played before, sure. Let them learn as they go. But if it's been session 2, session 3, and they're still asking you what action surge does, if they're playing a fighter in 5e, or if they're still asking you how ranged combat works if they're playing an archer, it's time to expect the player to put a little more effort into what they're doing, or maybe the hobby isn't for them. Something else, you can buy way too many accessories for this hobby. You don't need any of them. I would strongly recommend trying Theater of the Mind play. No maps, no minis, nothing. That can be very intimidating, but what it does is it conditions you and the players to asking questions. The heart of the game is asking questions. Player asks a question, DM answers. Every question should give more information to the player so they can make better decisions. If you don't have a map to look at and you don't have minis to look at, you don't have all this stuff to look at, and they're having to picture the room in their head, let's say I describe a chamber in a dungeon. I say it's foggy. I say there's water dripping from the walls. There's an exit on the wall opposite of where you came in, and nothing else. That's a very general description. There's not a whole lot there. If a player goes, hey, are there pools of water on the ground? That's something I didn't mention. It's something I forgot about. But the answer could very well be yes. I say, yes, there's a pool of water on the ground. Now they know another bit of information. Like, well, is the water draining down a grate? I can decide, or let the dice roll decide, is water draining down a grate? What they've now learned is there is something underneath this room if there is in fact a grate. It's a question and answer type of thing. When you take away all the measurements and distance and things like that and just get to a broad, general, abstracted understanding of the room, things tend to work out a lot better. So one of the reasons I like the distance system that some of the OSR games have, they've gone with close, near, far, like in Shadow Dark. I know Mothership uses a similar terminology. I can't remember what it is. They're just abstract. Close is, I can touch you. You're within arm reach. Near is a smallish room. Far is a big to a long room, maybe as far as a football field. And if you say, all right, everything in here is close by. Well, you know how far you can move. You can move close by in one turn. So everything kind of works on more general terms instead of specific. And it makes the game just go a lot quicker. Don't memorize all the rules. Make them up. Write them down and remember what you've made up, or make them up and then look up what the real one is. You can play any of these RPG games without memorizing all of the rules. It just depends on how nuanced you want to be with it. That gets me to another point. Different games lend themselves to different styles of play. If you like games that are very crunchy, and what crunchy means in this context is I want to add my numbers together, see how big the number I can get, and keep track of that number, and then use that to modify something else. It's very numbers heavy, where you like number go up, number go down, and that feels good to you to build characters like that. You want to play a game like Pathfinder, or Pathfinder 2, or D&D 3.5. These are more crunchy games. They're heavy on math, heavy on building optimized characters. If you want more story driven, where what the player says versus what the numbers affects the game, you want something that's more powered by the apocalypse, something that's very narrative driven, very light on numbers. And if you want something in the middle, start with 5e. Some people still say it's a little crunchy. I don't think so, but I like crunchy games. 5e is very middle ground. If you want something that lends itself towards horror or psychological, you play Call of Cthulhu or Mothership. If you want a lethal type of game, you can play Into the Odd, or you can play Mouse Ritter. If you want, there's so many you can pick from. It's just finding the one that fits the type of game you and your players like to play. I like running dungeons. My players do not like running dungeons a whole lot. So I have tailored our style of play to not running in dungeons that often, and it works out. I like crunchy. They like role play. So we don't do as much crunchy stuff as we do extra role play for them. Sometimes I get bored with it, yes, but sometimes they get bored if all we do is roll dice and add numbers. Don't be afraid to ask your players what it is that they enjoy. And then you can tailor a game that you enjoy and they enjoy, and it works out. I made another video, it's called Your TTRPG System is Broken. None of them are right. None of them are perfect. I think the Pathfinder 2 people got mad at me about it. I don't really care. That's the game system I run, and I can tell you it's not perfect. There's a lot of problems with it. Every game system can be modified and to work the way you want it to work. If you don't like the rule, throw the rule out. If you need a rule or something that's not in the game, add it in. But you're going to be doing a lot of extra work if you pick a system like Pathfinder 2 and you want to play psychological horror. You could just start with Call of Cthulhu. With almost all of these games, there's a free quick start guide that you can get. It's the basic rules, and you can play without investing anything into it. So that's my spiel on how you should approach DMing and starting in the hobby. It's a lot more daunting before you start than it is a month into it after you've done it a few times and you start to feel that you are getting the hang of what you're doing. And then you just kind of come up with your own methods for doing things. So don't feel like there's a hard and a fast and a right way, but do be adaptable. That's the biggest thing to be in a DM. Be adaptable and don't get stuck in a one set way of doing things, because if it's not working, throw it out and try something else.